Well, I want to welcome everyone again for another episode of Lemons Lemonade. I'm so excited about this time, and it's uh, our guest is Christy Kane. She is an entrepreneur. She is a licensed certified health counselor. She is also a speaker and author. And today is a little something different. She just got done writing a new book, and it is called Fractured Souls, Splintered Memories, what to unbox. Is that right?
Unlocking the boxes of trauma.
Unlocking the box of trauma. So there you go. Fractured souls, splintered memories, unlocking the box of trauma. I just can't remember handwriting. But I did read the book. I just don't have the title memorized. It's a long title, Christy.
Yeah.
But it was actually, it was actually a really good book. And I can't say it was an easy book to read though. But it was powerful. And so, and not to say it was actually well written and it was written well. It's just, but it's
a heavy topic.
Yes, it's a heavy topic. And so, and it was an emotional one. I shed a lot of tears reading this book, and I'm guessing you shed a lot of tears writing this book. So it was, and I think anybody who reads this can appreciate really the depth and I know it was we had three people involved, you, and then your the person involved. Why can't I think of her name?
Michelle. So you had Michelle, the client,
Yeah.
Dr. Natalie, the psychologist, and then I was able to share their story.
Yeah, share the story. And so, and the interesting thing is Michelle, although she's also a clinician herself, so she's a health professional, mental health.
She is. Yep.
So who very successful in her own right, and then but had gone through a lot of challenges in her life, and so this book basically kind of takes it from her in her starts in her almost 50 or 48 or something like that, right? When she
yes,
and then realizes at that point that it's time to maybe deal with some past. Is that right? And so
yeah, and the fun thing about that is although the events that she processes, most of them were during her childhood, it just shows that any of us at any time in our lives can make that decision to heal, and that it's never too late. And there's always avenues of healing that can be reached.
It also seemed like it was not only never too late. There is a time and season maybe that like she needed. Like she actually did a little bit of counseling early in her life, with the same Natalie, right?
She did.
And then came back, circled, 20 years later, whatever it was, and said, "Hey, I think it's time for me to take this to all the rest of the way, or whatever," and really unpack some stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a powerful message too, Michael, because healing comes in stages. We may have done therapy at some point in our life and then decide we'd like to continue and move a little bit forward. The wonderful thing I love about this book is, yes, the story is heavy. And I think, when people read it, it is going to create a lot of tears. But it gives you a very intimate, beautiful look at the client therapeutic relationship and the therapeutic process. So I think in many ways, it takes away the mystery.
Yeah.
Opens up the office for people who think, I'd like to see a counselor, but what would that look like? And I think this book gives a very good perspective of that.
Yeah. And the interesting thing, even though first of all, she went through some really heavy stuff. This was not, not everyone goes through what she's gone through, right? So
correct.
It wasn't easy for her to go, even though she knew the process.
Mm-hmm.
Still had to, and I've been reading a couple times when when it was going to be a really heavy session, she would, she wears sunglasses, she'd be across the room and just trying to be able to be okay, open up her, bearing her soul to Dr. Natalie in the process, but maybe just give a little for those listening. There was some starting with some physical abuse, and that was also, and then later we found out sexual abuse as well, and so with some family members, and there was the interesting. There was some healing. There was some forgiveness at some level, right, in the process. I think that she had to go through, or actually not had to, she got to go through. I think that was really maybe the benefit.
She made the step to be vulnerable for the process of healing, right?
Yeah.
And in that, as you talked about the fact that sometimes she didn't want to be in Dr. Natalie's office, and sometimes she wanted to be there and didn't want to be there, mixed emotions. And that's part of that vulnerability. You know, as humans, we want to heal, we want change, but then again, it can mean it's painful and it can be difficult. And so we go back and forth. And you see that very much with Michelle, that tug of war of, I need this, and I know I need this, but I don't want to do this, but I do want to do this. And I love the fact that this book is extremely raw.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's very, very vulnerable, and it's very, very honest. And it just gives people a chance to go, wow, you know?
Yeah. Well, you know, something we talked about the book earlier, and something I didn't we didn't talk about was there was actually another person, Ivan, I think. I mean, there was another person that was Michelle's friend,
Right.
She was able to, you know, bounce things off, and when she wasn't sure she could actually keep going, you know, he was there to say, no, you gotta keep going. This is helping you, whatever. And so and
Right.
that did play a critical role in her process. And
Yeah, she had a good friend that she could lean on. And I think in life, you know, when individuals ask me about, Dr. Kane, when do I know it's the right time to go to therapy, and how do I go about that? Some basic things that I say and that I think are brought forward in this book very clearly is you need the right therapist.
Yeah.
It needs to be the right time. And you need a support network, even if it's just one person that after you leave that therapeutic process, you know, appointment, that you can process things with, because your therapist isn't supposed to be there all the time. You know, you have a set schedule, but you need someone in that heat of the moment that you can call and say, I'm done. I'm so done. Or I want to keep doing this, as Michelle did. And so you're right. Ivan played a critical role for her as she sought to heal.
So the other thing I think that was fascinating for me too with this was there were some, you know, it was again, Michelle was a young person. I think a lot of this happened between birth and age 17, right? And so, and there were some people who weren't necessarily, they weren't the people causing the problems, but they didn't necessarily stop it either, right? She had an aunt she cared for that she would often go to her, kind of escape from, but the aunt didn't necessarily keep from happening. Her dad also was somebody who wasn't involved in the actual abuse, but he didn't necessarily stop it either. And so, and there was some, she had to deal with that, and maybe we could talk about, because I'm guessing anybody's ever gone through that before realizes there's somebody who maybe could have stopped it, didn't, but maybe for different reasons, various reasons.
Yeah, I think that as Michelle took her journey, you know, there was the healing from what had happened. There was the healing from the perspective of what she thought might have been her responsibility. And then there was the healing from those who chose to stand on the sidelines. And I think each set of those groups played a role in her life and played a different process of healing. And so I think, again, the book shows those therapeutic levels, because even the process of forgiving herself required vulnerability and honesty and authenticity to recognize that even when she blamed herself, there wasn't blame to be had. And even coming to that point of expressing her hurt towards those who didn't take action, because in the book she explains that she thought they couldn't as a child. You know, she excused their choices, but then as she went through therapy, she had to come and accept truth, and that as adults they perhaps should have made different choices.
Yeah. Well, and you know, something you said a little earlier kind of jarred me on something. There was one of the boxes, and I should have brought that. Each box was a session where she was dealing with the different parts of this whole journey, right?
Right.
And one of the boxes was her feeling a lot of guilt because of the, you know, finding at times pleasure from the experience, even though it was abuse, right? And because
Right.
and so maybe we can talk about that for a little bit. I think that was a powerful thing.
You know, I think one of the difficulties for individuals who have been involved in some type of sexual assault or sexual abuse is their own emotions and feelings, especially if there was some type of sexual stimulation, because oftentimes they'll blame themselves and they'll think it's their fault. And the reality is regardless of the situation, we're biologically wired to feel certain feelings. And so Michelle had to process through that in the book and recognize that it was a normal way for her to feel in a very abnormal, inappropriate situation. But that's one thing I find with almost all of the individuals I work with, especially in abuse cases, is that self-blaming because they felt emotions or they felt feelings or they didn't tell anyone. And so that's a part of therapy, is processing through that and allowing truth and responsibility to be on the shoulders of who it really belongs to.
Wow. And then another thing is obviously a lot of the book is childhood, but not all of it, right? There was
No,
there
there's
was
some adult.
yeah. I mean, so she made some decisions that were probably directly because of that, right? And then she had to deal with those decisions, right? And you know, she had a religious background, and so dealing with some of her own her concept of right and wrong, and then and how that goes into all these things, and maybe we could talk about that for a second. And,
You know, Michael, the most important thing really about why anybody goes into therapy is because they begin to see how it impacts their life today, right? And so she recognized that her choice, she was involved in a same-sex relationship for a little while. She recognized that some of her choices in her adult world came from her childhood. And so as she sought to resolve things according to her own personal faith, she tied some of her adult choices to her childhood. And that's kind of part of the reason that brought her back to therapy, right? And so for a lot of people, the reason that they began therapy is recognizing they're making choices or decisions in their life that aren't necessarily giving them the joy that they want or taking them where they desire to go. And that was the same in Michelle's case. She recognized she had made some choices in her adult life that maybe she wouldn't have made if her childhood had been different. And maybe she would have, who knows?
yeah.
But she definitely realized that that wall, that distance she felt between people was because of her past. And she wanted to feel more closeness and more connected to her family, to her children in life. And so that brought her to seek therapy.
And play about that, because it seemed like there was people came to her for help, but not for other ways, right? So I think she felt like she was always the pillar for other people, but not the connection, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
She always kind of felt on the sideline, even though people admired her and sought her out, but didn't necessarily invite her to a girls' weekend, right? So she felt that distance.
Yeah. Well, and then the other thing too is now she had gone through a divorce too after several years, but and then again that tied to the childhood too, and that kind of get back. And I think when she first went in there, even though she was a counselor herself, she didn't necessarily see the correlation until after getting it unpacked, right? That there was some of the behaviors that the husband was
acted on, yes,
acted on was directly tied to the behaviors that she was dealing with in her youth, some of the abuse.
And that's the fun thing about this book. It's between two psychologists.
Yeah.
And so it's a practicing psychologist, right, who takes the role of being a client again. And it's an interesting play because she definitely has to stay in the role of the client or the therapy isn't effective. And so even Dr. Natalie, I think at moments reminds Michelle that she's not the counselor in the office, she's the client. And together, Michelle is able to see and identify things with the help of Dr. Natalie that she wasn't willing to see in reference to the marriage. So you're very correct.
Wow. And I think, because here's the thing about it is, I think that's probably, I doubt that's an unusual thing. I think that probably happens a lot if people who went through some similar things that Michelle went through, that they do repeat those things later on. So I think that was powerful to see that played out in this book, and that maybe help people who maybe have gone through that themselves to that potentially that's their world as well. I thought it was very powerful.
It gives us a good perspective that our past definitely impacts our present, right?
Yeah.
Michelle had a good life. She enjoyed being with her children. She didn't continue the abuse that she experienced as a child. And most victims, especially in the areas of sexual abuse, don't continue what they experienced as a child. But she also recognized it created some walls and distance and compartmentalization that she wanted to change. All of us are a makeup of all the events that we've experienced, good and bad. And sometimes how we make it through those things at the moment later on may create some issues that need to be resolved.
Yeah. So, I mean, what would you say then? I mean, like I said, obviously we're going to mention the book again, and they can get and read it and stuff. But I mean, for a lot of people, that's going to be enough, right? They need to actually go. Maybe hopefully this will trigger the desire to maybe go deal with some things they've been holding off for a while, right? So, what would be the first step they should do if they're dealing with some same things that Michelle went through, or anything like it?
I think all of us can benefit from therapy. We can all benefit from having someone act as a sage to reflect back to us what we're going through and what we're thinking. The first step for anyone who's questioning if therapy could be beneficial is to go find that right therapist and take the risk and don't give up. You know, Michelle went in her 20s and then she went back in her 40s, recognizing a journey still needed to take place. I think it takes a lot of strength to be willing to be vulnerable. And that's what therapy is about, is really looking at ourselves, right? And I think any of us can seek to improve through the process of therapy.
Mm-hmm. And then as far as like trying to find one and the right one, because it's not always going to match up perfectly with each other, right? Not all therapists create equal, and all clients are created equal either, right? So, are there some suggestions for somebody who is in that process?
Well, I think you need to find experts in the field that have a history of treating what you want to deal with. And I would ask friends. I would ask people that you might know who are in the field that maybe you don't think they would be the right person, but they might be able to refer someone. And I'd be willing to interview the therapist. When you go into that therapy session that first time, you should be interviewing the therapist as much as they're interviewing you, just to really find out if it's going to be that connection.
So you mentioned the vulnerability. What else do they need to, because it's work. This isn't I'm going to go there one time and bam, I'm good, right? What can they, is there fortitude? What do you think that they're going to need to be able to go through, to get the kind of success that maybe Michelle or other people have had?
No, I ask every single client that sits down in my office to visualize the last session, so that if they walked out of Dr. Kane's office, they would say, that journey with Dr. Kane was effective because we got here. It's really important to spend some time and think about, where do you want to get to? And that will help you increase and determine that therapy process and that vulnerability. Maybe you want to let go of anger and judgment from the past. Maybe you feel like you need to find forgiveness for yourself. Maybe you're struggling with your own faith. Maybe you're not sure about how to have healthy relationships. Whatever that issue is, visualize what you want it to look like and give that picture to the therapist. And that will help prepare for the journey.
That's powerful. Wow. Huh. So tell us about Michelle today. Now, how's her life changed now that she's gone through this whole? And I can't remember how long was it. Was it 18 months? It was
yeah. Yeah, that was the funny part. When Michelle started explaining her story, she made it very clear that therapy was only going to be a couple weeks. And then I think her and Dr. Natalie ended up at about 18 months of pretty intense therapy. What I know of Michelle, based on the sharing of her story, is she's back in her clinical practice. She feels like she has that deeper connection and that resolvement that she wanted. She feels like still today that Dr. Natalie was the right person for her in that journey, and that it wouldn't have happened with anyone else but Dr. Natalie. And I think she's moving forward in more relaxed and enjoys life more and is able to take in the moments. I think if she was to, it's hard for me to necessarily say exactly because I wrote the book and life is moving forward. One thing I can say about the book is Michelle went through 2 different healing times. I don't know if she'll ever return to therapy again, but I love the fact that it doesn't ever have to be a closed door. It just depends on our growth. And who knows, Michelle may find herself someday seeking further clarification. And so it's a good thing for people to know that it's not all or nothing. And it does have to be the right time. It really does. I've had clients come into my office and they weren't ready.
Yeah.
And so it really does need to be, when you're ready.
Yeah.
The right person at the right time.
Yeah. I mean, that's powerful. So, I guess the last thing. Well, actually, first of all, if somebody wants to read the book, how would they read it? What would they?
So the book is called Fractured Souls, Splintered Memories, Unlocking the Boxes of Trauma. I have a copy.
Yeah, there.
And it is for sale on Amazon.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
And so they can get it on Amazon.
Okay, and I would definitely recommend people do that. It really was a powerful. It's not that long. It's a fairly short read. But you won't forget it. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I won't forget it. That's true.
And I think it really opened up my eyes, at least, to I think maybe we all could use we all got baggage. We all got stuff we're dealing with, right? And so what amazing book. And so then okay, if what will be your last just for somebody? Hey, they're going through a tough time. They don't know, is it time, not time? What would you say to them?
First, what would I say? I'm going to be biased, right, Michael? I'm going to say, read my book.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I would say that too after reading it.
Read my book, leave a good review on Amazon, and don't be afraid to just ask. One therapy session isn't going to kill you.
Yeah.
Just go see. And oftentimes that therapist will help you know. Like I've said to some clients, I don't think now's the time. And I've said to other clients, this is going to take us some time. And to others, I've said, 1 or 2 sessions, I think we're going to get there. So I would say, if you feel like there's some growth that you would like, go talk to a therapist. And Michael, I shared I'm on Instagram, and it's at dr.Christy Kane, I think. And I shared something yesterday that was really insightful. We run around in this world and we hear things about, oh, I need to change. I need to change. And in my little video that I shared yesterday, I said, what? Change is a negative. If we're around people that say you need to change, that's not positive. Or if we're telling that to ourselves, instead, the word should be growth. I want improvement and growth in my life. And that's much more powerful than someone saying to me, you need to change. Mm-hmm. It's much more appropriate if they say, there's room for improvement and growth here. And that's what therapy is about. It's not about changing us. It's helping us to find and become our best selves.
Well, I love it. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on today. And I think it's going to really help a lot of people. So I really appreciate it.
Sounds good. Thanks, Michael.